neighbors. We are not in the center. We don't have as neighbors Belgium or Austria. We have as neighbor United States. So it's obvious that a Quebec currency will be extremely difficult to apply. And I will not argue about that very long. After 11 years of hesitation, the Parti Québécois came to that conclusion. And to demonstrate that, they tabled studies at the end of December, in the middle of December 78, they tabled at the National Assembly 3 studies in order to demonstrate that it is not desirable to have a Quebec currency. But as I said to Mr. Lévesque 13 years ago, and I could still say now, if you eliminate the Quebec currency for obvious economic reasons, and if to reassure the Quebec people, as Mr. Parizeau is saying himself, you go for a Canadian currency, then you are back to the federal system. I know it's maybe technical, but it is fundamental. You are back to the federal system because a common currency means common fiscal powers. And common fiscal powers means an elected parliament because of the principle, no taxation without representation. I said that to Mr. Parizeau last week. I quote his own budget last year. When they did abolish the tax of the urban community in Montreal, the surtax on the urban community, you know the reason which was invoked by Mr. Parizeau in his budget? We have to abolish that tax because it is not established by directly elected people. So if you apply that principle of no taxation without representation at the municipal level, you should apply it a fortiori at the national level. So common currency means common fiscal powers. If you don't agree with me, we could discuss that. And this, the Parti Québécois is admitting that itself. And common fiscal power means a central and elected parliament. It's what I call, in all my speeches around the province, the theory of the triangle. If A is necessarily connected to B, and if B is necessarily connected to C, A is necessarily connected to C. That means a common currency means a Canadian parliament. This is very important. It's maybe technical, it's not emotion, it's not flag waving, but it's fundamental for the functioning of the economic association which is proposed in the white paper of the Parti Québécois. And they have no answer to that after 14 years. And I faced Mr. Parizeau last week just to be able to have him before me. Of course, he was refusing to have a face-to-face, but we were discussing, we could discuss together through the question from the students, just to check exactly what were the arguments of the Parti Québécois to explain that. They could not come with that with the people of Quebec and say it will function. It's irresponsible for a government or a party to lead a population like that in the unknown. And the white paper itself, at page 70 of the French version, it's not even mentioned the possibility of a central parliament. When you look in Europe, as I told you, they don't have even a common currency now. They have only a monetary union. And even without a monetary union, they took the decision last June to have an elected parliament. And in our case, in the case of the Parti Québécois, they are proposing a step further than a monetary union, a common currency. They are proposing a greater degree of economic integration, and they don't want the Canadian Parliament. So they have to explain that to the people. Mr. Lévesque is replying up to now, this is secondary. We will find a solution. It's the time now to explain, to reply to all those questions. Because the more we talk with them, that's my understanding. The more we talk with them, the more we realize that it's not feasible. We could quote studies tabled by them themselves. Mr. Rousseau, who was one of the experts of those studies which were tabled by the PQ government on December 22, 1978. Mr. Rousseau himself, an expert quoted for the Parti Québécois, said in one of his studies, there is no example of a monetary union which could survive without political integration. So that's one argument for Quebecers to say to the thesis for the Sovereignty Association, it can't work, even if the 4 regions of English Canada, would accept to discuss on a parity basis with the 1 region constituted by Quebec. Even if those 4 regions would accept to discuss with Quebec on a parity basis, it cannot function. A second argument to keep the federal link is a practical and economic argument. We have now within Canada one of the richest part of natural resources of the world, Northern Canada, territories of the Northwest. Maybe there are hundreds of billions of dollars of natural resources. Every month they are making discoveries. Why we would be irresponsible to cut the link with that potential of natural resources? We could discuss the pro and con of the federal system. Obviously, we could discuss that for months. Mr. Lévesque will talk about the auto pack. Mr. Ryan will reply with the oil subsidies. Mr. Lévesque will talk about duplication. Mr. Ryan will reply with equalization payments. So we could talk ad infinitum about the pro and con of the federal system. But there is an argument that nobody can reply in the Parti Québécois. Why, when this decade will be probably in the history the decade of the energy crisis, we will cut Quebecers from that privileged access to one of the richest part of the world and natural resources. Of course, we have natural resources, hydraulic resources. I could talk about that. We developed James Bay despite a lot of opposition. The Parti Québécois said at that time, don't develop that. It's the mistake of the century. Nuclear energy is the energy of the future. Now it's becoming the energy of despair for those who have no other energy. So what? They were saying we made a big mistake. And now the same people who said that, the same ministers, the same members of parliament who said that if in 1971 our choice would have been nuclear energy, it would have cost 44% more compared with hydraulic power for Quebecers. It would have cost $6.5 billion more to the Quebec society, 6 to 7 times the Olympic deficit, if we had followed the advice of the Parti Québécois. But this is the past. We have energy here, but we don't have all the natural resources. Up to now, we have no gas, we have no oil, we have no uranium. So there is an immense potential there. We have our share as Quebecers. So this is an additional reason, so practical reasons. And as a minority within North America, the Quebec people, the French Canadian and North America constitute only 2% of the population. We have to be responsible. We have to calculate our risk. And this is a great source of economic strength. So why we will cut our privileged access to that? Third reason will be that it is possible with the federal link to work and to pass law and to protect the French culture. I did it with Bill 22 in 1974, making French the official language. Of course, I was not totally understood at that time. There were a lot of opposition. You could ask why I did that. I think the situation, the political situation, the Gendron report, there were a lot of reasons to justify that. It was, now it appears as a moderate proposal. It was strongly opposed on both sides in 74. The French-speaking population was saying it's not enough. The English-speaking population was saying it's too much. And of course, the Federalist vote was split. And you know the result. If we had 2 rounds like in the French system, I'm sure that at the second round, the English-speaking population, which did vote for the National Union, would have to think twice at that time before electing the Parti Québécois. But Bill 22 and Bill 101 are examples showing the powers of the Quebec government to fight for the culture. Now, as I said, I could say that to you. Most of you are English-speaking students. If I could reply in French, if they are French-speaking students during the question period, but I could say that to you. It's hard to find places in the world where the minority could not, like in the West Highland, actually, presently, advertise their merchandise and the language of their clients. It's hard to find a place in the world where you will have, as it is now, a merchant or a shop owner who inside his own shop is unable to use the language of 90% of its clients. This was not Bill 22. Bill 22 was imposing French, but was not preventing the use of English. Of course, some English-speaking citizens have a responsibility and refusing the use of French or the imposition of French, now they cannot even use English. So it's not an improvement in the situation. But just to show you that it's not contradictory to the federal link to give cultural powers. And we have other fields. I was looking, when I was leader of Quebec, for cultural sovereignty. I thought that this was the solution, that if and fields where we are different with the rest of Canada, we should have the total autonomy, or we should be independent, because we cannot be responsible to a culture of another government, or to another government of a different culture. If we could have, in those fields, the independence or all the cultural security, already we have a lot of powers. I was able to sign treaties or agreements with the French Prime Minister. They call it Bourassa-Chirac agreements. You don't have Bill Davis, Mrs. Thatcher agreements, to my knowledge. So that means that in the present situation, we are able to have a lot of cultural powers. In fact, we could put that in the Constitution. We have to increase those cultural powers in some fields, communications, and in practice now we have a right of veto in the field of immigration. But this is culture. Culture could be defined in many ways, but in my view it was defined when I was leader in relation with 4 important fields: communications, immigration, language, and education. So this is a third reason that what we are seeing now in the common market, sovereignty which is becoming divisible, we could apply that, and we could apply that situation in Quebec for the field of culture, in order not to be dependent where we are a province not like the others. But in all the other fields, we could be Canadians. And we have good reasons, good practical reasons to stay Canadians. So I think I give you enough to start a discussion. I try to give you the main outlines of what will be an important debate in the next few months. I would say the vote on the referendum will be an existential vote. Obviously the question is not over clear, but politically it will be extremely important for all of us and for the English-speaking community within Quebec, obviously. There is no doubt about the consequences. So I would like to invite you to ask me all the questions about the present, about the future, or about the past. Why I came with such a love, from 1970 to the end of 76, we had extremely important events in the life of the Quebec society, so I have no objection to talk about it, and I would like to thank you very warmly for your great attention. Thank you. For marketing purposes? Yes, but that's the job of the politician to face the marketing of the opponents. You say the Parti Québécois could say we made James Bay, therefore we could make independence. They might try to sell that, but up to now they were not very successful, because everybody, all Quebecers could remember their strong opposition to James Bay. So I don't think it will be taken seriously if we are considering the situation with all the facts.
Mr. Bourassa, without necessarily asking you to comment the beige paper of the Constitutional Commission of the Quebec Liberal Party, in view of what has been happening in the linguistic evolution here, the evolution rather of the linguistic question in Quebec, there is one proposal in the beige paper which guarantees a certain entrance of immigrants, Anglophone immigrants, for the Anglophone community, therefore ensuring them of a continuation of new blood, new ideas, so that they will not become a stagnant and dying community in Quebec. Would you see that as a solution to the problem that the Anglophone community is living here in Quebec?
First, on the whole, I would say the paper of Mr. Ryan could be a great improvement to the Canadian system. The paper of Mr. Ryan got the support of the Ontario government a few days ago, and if it's having the support of the Ontario government, it certainly will have the support of the Western provinces. With the Federal Council, this is an insurance policy against any intervention and additional centralization. I think this is very important. As to the particular question you are asking for, it's perhaps one of the most delicate questions, the linguistic question. I told you that my experience about that is that people is reacting emotionally to those questions. Mr. Bertrand came with 1969, and he lost great support to the PQ from the nationalists because of that. I came with Bill 22 in 74, and I lost great support from the English-speaking population. The problem is that if you are accepting that recommendation, implicitly you could have a discrimination that I did try to avoid with this test system with Bill 22. You know, I had to face that in Bill 22. Should I accept the mother tongue? But we said to ourselves, if we accept the mother tongue, that means that immigrants coming from Jamaica or Australia or other English-speaking countries, Pakistan, will be able to have the freedom of choice. But immigrants coming from Italy, Greece, or Portugal will not have that possibility. So implicitly, you have a kind of discrimination between two categories of immigrants. And that's why we came with a solution which obviously was not very efficient, with the test system. Because the test was an objective criteria. It was not based on mother tongue. It was not based on a race. It was based objectively on a test. And we knew that there were many tests which were used in many other schools. But in practice, it was almost a disaster, because all the children, we had many problems in applying the test, so we have to drop that, and we were trying to find another formula when the people thought we were there enough. But we were considering that mother tongue. We were considering that mother tongue approach, and we did eliminate it because our conviction was it was implying discrimination between different groups of immigrants. With the test system, an Italian student who could understand English and speak English could go to the English-speaking school. The same for Greek or Portuguese. But with the mother tongue, even if he knew English, he could not go. So we came with that formula instead of the mother tongue, and that's why I cannot tell you that I agree totally with that approach because of that implicit discrimination, but I can only tell you that the formula we did choose was not working better.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay, you talked a lot about, you gave a little pitch on why we should not accept sovereignty association. Could you get more specific because perhaps deal with what your expectations economically are for Quebec in the 80s? What do you foresee?
Well, I would say we have an economic situation which is quite comparable with many other provinces. We have quality of manpower. We have a lot of natural resources. We will have growth of the population, which might be lower. But one of my projects, one of my immediate concrete ways to solve the economic situation was to accelerate the building of dams. You know, we could have plans for 5 years and 10 years for the future, the economic future of Quebec. But one immediate concrete way would be to accelerate the building of dams. I got some figures from Hydro-Quebec showing that if we invest during the 80s $6 to $7 billion in acceleration of dams, we could save $11 billion and a half during the 90s. So I think this will be paid by the consumer in the U.S. So that's a concrete way to create jobs, especially in the construction field. I'm not saying there are no problems. There are the financing problems and other problems. But this is a concrete way to create jobs and to face the potential and to accelerate the economic growth within the province of Quebec. But I'm not overly optimistic. It's impossible to be overly optimistic for the next 10 years with all the challenge we have. But we have assets here that do not exist elsewhere and that we should benefit to the maximum.
What happens if these assets are not exploited and if these build dams?
I would say we'll need a good government, but you could fund, as I said very often in the last few months, you could build an heritage fund, and with that money you could invest in steel, you could invest in modernization of textile, and many regrouping of companies. So you could create a lot of jobs with those funds, because we have here a geographical situation which is in the center of Canada with access to the great markets, and we have relatively cheap energy.
Okay, we could. What will we do?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not the Prime Minister no more. So when I was there, when I was there, I was giving the priority to economic growth, and the fact the rate of creation of jobs was relatively high, and despite problems with the Olympic Games and labor relations and all that. So it's not, but I'm sure that all parties, PQ or Liberals or National Union, all parties are quite aware now of the great economic problems facing us in the next decade.
Mr. Bourassa, since Claude Ryan has become leader of the Liberal Party, Raymond Garneau, Bryce Mackesy, Victor Goldbloom have all left at different times. Jean-Paul Lallier, who I think was your most nationalist minister, as far as I know, is not active within the party. These people were most closely associated with yourself. My question to you, Mr. Bourassa, is do you think that Mr. Ryan is trying to rid the QLP of its Bourassa image?
Bryce Mackesy was not close.
Well, you brought him in with ostensibly to
he was. Of course, he came with
position.
me in 1966, but he was not a minister of my cabinet.
No, but he was closely associated with you, and the feeling was that you offered him a cabinet position, because I don't think he really wanted to sit on the back benches, the type of person he is.
I don't know the conversation between Bryce Mackesy and Claude Ryan about the future Liberal cabinet. I would say that Raymond Garneau was not. Took the decision to go into private business. He was minister for 7 years, and he thought that it will be it's about time for him to go in the private business, to leave politics. I would now, a lot of close collaborators of Mr. Ryan, like Guy Saint-Pierre, Girard Delévesque, Claude Forget, Fernand Lalonde, were my own minister and were close minister, were important minister. I went personally to get Claude Forget when he was a civil servant in the Department of National Affairs. I convinced him to be a candidate. I did intervene to open a riding for him, a safe riding for him in Saint Laurent, a safer riding than my own riding in Mercy. And you know, all those people are all those ministers or former ministers are very close to Mr. Ryan, and they are still work with and will work with Mr. Ryan.
There was also
It's normal for a new leader. It's not surprising for a new leader to come to try to have a renewal I don't know of any political leader just elected saying, I will go with the pass. You know, Mr. Trudeau now is trying to convince that he will improve the situation, that he will control the public expenditures, that he will come with an energy policy. So it's normal for Mr. Ryan to say, I will try to establish a renewal within the Liberal Party. But the facts are that still now our closest collaborators of Mr. Ryan are my former colleagues.
Is it true that Mr. Ryan told you not to be active in politics for at least another 10 years?
No, he never told me that.
That's what I read.
If you believe everything you read, but I would say I was defeated. You know, when you are defeated in politics, you don't have a lot of leeway. Mr. Lesage was defeated in '66. It was a very good period for Quebec, one of the best periods of Quebec history, the Quiet Revolution. And he had to quit in '69. Mr. Trudeau was defeated very closely and 6 months ago, and he took the decision to quit. Now, because of events, he came back. It was the same with Mr. Saint Laurent. So when you lose in politics, in active politics these days, when you lose an election, you have to take the responsibility. I came with a quick election for many reasons, the patriation of the Constitution and other reasons, the breakdown of social consensus, and I lost the election because of the split in the Federalist vote. I thought I would win. I thought that perhaps the English-speaking voters a few days before the election date will realize the risk they are taking in splitting the Federalist vote. That's why I'm telling you that I underestimate the emotional response to language legislation. This is a great lesson for me, that when you deal with language, you don't have a rational response. But you know, I said I lost and I quit.
I'd like to get back to the question for a minute of the immigration and education. With the high influx of immigrants to Quebec and the imposition upon them to attend the French language education system, I want to know why, and if it does and should qualify as just one means of preserving the French culture in Quebec as defined by either the Liberal government or any other government in the province.
Your question is whether this is justified.
Yeah, if it's justified to impose immigrants coming to Quebec to attend French schools as a means of preserving the culture, I'm not exactly sure if that is one way of preserving a culture.
Yeah, we could question that, but this is one of the most difficult problems of the Quebec society. We had the Gendron report, which was made public in '73. There were recommendations in the report. We followed some, we did not follow others. But you have to realize that in the old world, or perhaps even in the history of the world, you don't have a bigger cultural disproportion than the one existing now in North America. 98% of one culture, 2% of the other culture. And the Quebec government is the only French-speaking government in North America. Quebec was becoming an open society. It was a closed society before 1960. It's now an open society with communications, open to all external pressures about culture. So the Quebec government taught in 1974, and personally as leader of the Quebec government, even if I'm not a narrow nationalist, I thought that as I had a responsibility to face that question. Demographic tendencies were clear. Our proportion within Canada was going down and down. The rate of assimilation of French Canadian and Western provinces was 75% or 80%. So I thought I had to do something. I came with Bill 22, the test system, which was relatively flexible on paper, but extremely difficult to apply in practice. But it was my responsibility and the responsibility of my party. There was a resolution of the Liberal Party passed in 1972, October, during the convention of October '72, which was clear and asking the government to go further than Bill 22 went. So we did realize that as the most threatened majority in the world, with the greatest cultural disproportion in one territory, if you consider North America a sole territory, that we had to hack. And that's why we limit the application of immigrants to English-speaking school, since up to that time, 75 to 80% of all immigrants went to English-speaking school, when French Canadians constitute 80% of the French-speaking population in Quebec. So you had demographic reasons, you have cultural reasons, you have, I would say, social peace reasons also. Don't forget that from 64 to 71 or to 70, you have political violence in Quebec. So you have all kinds of reasons. And you have, let's say, the Gendron report, which justify the government to do something. It's not an easy thing. As I told you, it's the most delicate problem for any Quebec government. And Mr. Ryan will have the same problems when he will, most probably, will be back in power next year or at the end of this year, and he will have to take a decision about Bill 101 and about the mother tongue we just discussed previously. It has advantages, it has disadvantages. Okay. And he will have problems because on one side, the English-speaking population of Quebec will say, we want freedom of choice. We don't want discrimination between different categories of immigrants. And the French-speaking population will object to put that in the Constitution, because the French-speaking population, or some of them, would say, what we will do in 25 years if we have to limit the inscription of English-speaking immigrants from Jamaica or United States, and or if there's a cultural disequilibrium in Quebec, what we will do if that is in the Constitution and we could not change the Constitution because we would need the approval of English Canada. So all Quebec governments, since the beginning of the Quiet Revolution, have to face that language question. And it's the extremely delicate question for the reason I just mentioned to you. There's the fundamental principle of freedom of choice on one side, but on the other side, you have a cultural group which is threatened in terms of number, and the only government to protect that cultural group is the Quebec government.
I think, though, that the preservation of a culture involves a little more than just language, and that if you have immigrants coming to the province, having them learn the French language is not going to increase the number of French-speaking Canadians or French-speaking Quebecois. The people themselves have a culture, they have values, they have attitudes, and that is what has made the French-speaking Canadian culture as unique as it is. And I don't think that any amount of enforcement of the French language upon immigrants or other Canadians will make any substantial changes. The culture has to be preserved in other ways rather than enforcement of the language.
Yeah, I respect your viewpoint, but after a certain times, the Quebec society as a whole thought that something restrictive, of course we could discuss the modalities, that something restrictive should be established. And I would say now there is more or less, I would not say a total consensus, but a kind of quasi-consensus that it will be extremely difficult to come back to the situation existing before 1974 or during the 60s. Because Bill 63 came because of Saint Léonard, as you remember, and Bill 22 came because after the Gendron report, which itself came from Bill 63. And Bill 101 came after Bill 22. We will have to consider the other things. And Bill 101, I would say that all Quebecers, including most of the supporters of the Parti Québécois, would not agree. I would be surprised if Mr. Lévesque himself would agree that an indoor businesses or shops or restaurants, that it is impossible to use English. Of course, this is in the law in Bill 101, but I would be surprised that Mr. Lévesque will not agree to change that one day or another. So there's a consensus to change some excesses in the language legislation. But as to coming back to the situation existing before those language law, I would say it's not, in my view for the time being, it's not realistic to consider that politicians will agree with that. Because in the case of Mr. Ryan, the mother tongue approach is going further than Bill 22. I hope you realize that it's more restrictive than Bill 22, the mother tongue approach, which is in the paper, the Livre Beige of Mr. Ryan. So this is showing you that with the time, the restriction is not going down.
As we travel to neighboring states that are neighboring along the Quebec border, I personally think it's a pleasure to see signs that say "Nous parlons français." However, I just hope that it doesn't come to the situation here in Quebec where we'll start seeing signs eventually that say "We speak English."
Mr. Bourassa, turning to problems of a more local nature, what is your reaction to the problems of the City of Montreal? The loss of, as a status as Canada's most important city, loss of population, loss of head offices, and so forth. I think this was a problem when you were heading the government in Quebec, and I'm wondering what your opinion is on the future of Montreal and how it relates to the future of the province.
You know, if you look at Toronto itself, if you look at the population of Toronto itself, you would see that it's or New York, or all those great cities, there is a strong tendency, which is starting now slowly to be reversed, perhaps because of the energy crisis and the fact that living in suburbs will cost more and more in transport costs. But it's still not existing. This is a general tendency in the case of Montreal. Of course, we were the metropolis, and during the 50s we were the first city, but now it's obviously no more the case. I would say that the growth of the economy of Quebec and the future will depend more on the regions than it was the case during the last decades, and that we should have count more on the growth or the development of natural resources, the exploitation, the transformation of natural resources and many regions, as I told you, consider when I discussed about the hydroelectric power and other resources. That we don't have to consider the case of Montreal in a closed way. The administration of Montreal is aware. They are having some plans from some openings for Montreal for the future. I'm not talking about casino. I don't think we should rely for casino to develop more Montreal. I don't think that's an appropriate way. I was against that when I was in power. But there are other ways, parallel ways that could be used in order to increase the strength of Montreal, but it's impossible to go back to the 50s. I believe that the strength of Quebec will depend more and more on regions than only on the regions of Montreal.
Mr. Bourassa, in your response to somebody's question, you said that we have the advantage in Quebec of paying only 50% of oil and gas prices compared to the international levels. These artificially low prices, they keep the demand high. Now, don't you see these low prices as a detriment in the long run, and that we won't be as aggressive in developing alternative energy sources?
Yes, but if I agree with you that it's not I'm talking about the advantages of having those resources within Canada. But even if we were having the international price in Canada, or close to the Chicago price, as they say, 85% of the Chicago price, because of our competition with the rest of with the United States, I think the profits or the margin of profit will go back to Canadians and more exploitation. So it's not an argument. It's not because we will have the international price that we should, as I'm talking, if I were a Péquiste, it's not because the price of oil, they are saying now, of course we had an advantage for the price of oil, but that advantage will be thrown in a few years. This is not a serious argument because the increase in price will go back to Canadian in many ways. It will come through equalization payments. Quebec is receiving more equalization payments with every increase in the price of oil. And if we were importing oil, when we are importing oil and when there's additional increase, then we are giving money to other countries without any benefit to Canada. So either we are having a lower price for economic reasons than the international price, and I think all governments now, all federal parties, agree to have a lower price than the international price, perhaps 85% of the Chicago price I just mentioned you. This will keep our competitive strength with our neighbors. And with the additional amount which is paid by Canadians, this could go back to reduce the deficit, to reduce the rate of inflation, to develop other sources of energy, and Northwest Canada. So we will have the benefits of increased price. So whatever way, if we have a lower price, we have a consumer benefit. If we have a higher price, we have an economic benefit. If, of course, we control in an efficient way the additional profits for the companies. But this is a question of modality, whether we should have recourse to Petro-Canada or private companies. But this is a question of control by governments of using all those profits.
Okay, another thing you said that we have northern natural resources worth potential billions of dollars. Now, realistically, do we have the capital and technology necessary to develop these resources, or are we going to depend again on the Americans to supply this, like we did in James Bay?
Now, in the case of James Bay, we did not rely to the Americans to control the development. We did borrow in the United States because they thought it was a good investment, but they had no control at all. They just lending money with a rate of interest, and that we could pay that very easily with the profit we are making. And increasing the price of oil, or increasing the price of natural resources, we will have some capital to develop Canada. This is important to realize. If we don't increase that, it will be more difficult. But there is a possibility that most of their countries, they don't even have natural resources, and they don't have the possibility to have the capital to develop natural resources. In Canada, we have the natural resources. Of course, we need capital to develop that, but we have also the possibility to increase that capital and having an international price, or almost an international price, or I would say a more realistic price with the price of natural resources. So it's a question of policy for governments to decide whether they should protect the consumer on a short-term basis, or whether they should try to develop as much as possible the Canadian economy with that money.
Okay, thank you.
Monsieur Bourassa, je voudrais savoir quelle est votre opinion sur les avantages et les désavantages économiques et sociaux de la nationalisation de l'industrie de l'amiante au niveau québécois et canadien.
Sur le plan politique comme tel, je crois qu'on ne peut pas s'opposer à ce que le gouvernement du Québec ou la société québécoise soit présent dans le marché de l'amiante. Le gouvernement n'étatise pas l'ensemble du secteur de la viande, il étatise une des 5 entreprises. Qui soit présent dans ce secteur-là, une richesse naturelle où le Québec a à toute fin pratique un monopole avec la Russie, je ne crois pas que dans autant que je suis concerné, ce soit contestable. J'aurais pu le faire quand j'étais au pouvoir, quand j'étais chef du gouvernement, mais j'ai pensé à ce moment-là que ce n'était pas une priorité, parce que ça ne créait pas des emplois immédiatement. Ça ne faisait que racheter une entreprise. Comme ça ne créait pas des emplois immédiatement, j'ai remis la décision à plus tard, investissant plutôt dans Sidbeck-Normine pour créer des emplois et développer notre économie. Mais le principe d'être présent dans un secteur clé, c'est bon, de nos richesses naturelles, il est acceptable. L'amiante, maintenant, sans que je sois un expert, il semble bien que l'amiante est de plus en plus contestée. Qu'il y a des règlements qui s'établissent aux États-Unis, au marché commun, partout, pour restreindre l'utilisation de l'amiante. Alors, sous réserve d'avis d'experts, que je n'ai pas, il paraît assez risqué de se lancer aujourd'hui dans une étatisation d'une richesse naturelle qui devient de plus en plus controversée à l'échelle des marchés mondiaux. Alors, je vous dis que politiquement, ça me paraît une décision qui se défend dans la mesure où l'amiante est une richesse naturelle, mais que dans le cas particulier de l'amiante elle-même, dans le contexte actuel, ça me paraît beaucoup plus discutable, étant donné les problèmes que ça peut causer éventuellement.
Merci.
Monsieur le Premier ministre, j'aimerais vous demander votre opinion au sujet...
Vous parlez du passé ou de l'avenir?
Non, je parle de l'avenir. I'm speaking of the future. In the Financial Post, je vais parler en anglais parce que je ne veux pas recevoir de roche. Mr. Prime Minister, Stephen Duncan had signed an article in the Financial Post saying that our export must finance new facilities for Canadians. We should develop our natural resource by putting, for example, extra taxes on gas export, oil, or electricity? I would like to have your opinion on that. And do you believe that if this thing should be done, should it be done by the states or by legislation?
It's the law of supply of demand. I would say if we take oil, there, of course, we could charge, we cannot charge more than the international price to increase our exports revenues. As to hydroelectric power, we have to see what the market can bear. There's no doubt that now in New York they are paying almost 5 times more than Quebecers. So this is a margin of profit which is relatively important. But we have to respect the laws of market. It's like the situation now in U.S. For the first time in their history in U.S. now, the American way of life is threatened. There is no more economic independence when we see U.S. at the mercy of a palace revolution in Saudi Arabia. They are importing 47% of their consumption in oil. So this is a great economic dependence for them. And the only way for them to change that will be to change the American way of life. That means to decrease the individual mobility, which is the essence, perhaps, of one of the most important part of the American way of life. In the case of Canadians, it's part of our way of life to spend our holidays in the South. Well, a lot of us. But this is increasing the deficit.
It's a matter of taste, Mr. Prime Minister.
Don't tell me you go to the north in January. So you increase with that way of life of ours, we increase the deficit of our balance of payment. And because we increase that deficit of balance of payment, because we want to borrow a lot in U.S., because we want to have more jobs. Take the example of GM. When I was in power, the Parti Québécois was strongly attacking me as a puppet of the multinational all the time. But when they took power, they were offering GM, I think, with the collaboration of the federal government, 112 millions in order to get GM in Quebec. To get that poor multinational in Quebec, they offered them 112 millions. They even take out a contract from Bombardier, a Quebec company, in Valcourt, a true Quebec company. They took a contract from them and they gave it to GM, just to please General Motors. This was done by the Parti Québécois, one of the, let's say, most anti-multinational party when they were in the opposition, just to show you that they realize that Quebec wants to have more jobs rapidly, and to achieve that, they need risk capital, and they were ready to accept multinational. But that means more dividends to U.S., a weakening of our balance of payments. So as long as we want to keep our way of life, spending a lot and traveling in other countries, accepting foreign investment as much as we can in order to have strong economic growth, we will have those problems of finding additional way for export. But you have to find a solution for a problem when you look at the causes. And these are the causes of the problems now existing. And that's why you could find some gadget to increase the export. But unless you change that, unless you affect the way of life of people, you will always have to face those problems.
There is another question, if you don't mind. In 1972, there was a mixed commission of the Senate, of the federal government, saying that 85% of our natural resources were held by foreign investors. In my opinion, Eastern Canadians are paying a lot of money for their oil, and if the Conservative Party is going to be elected again, is promising us a nice gift of 18 cents a gallon and other gifts that many Canadians, as much as French Canadian or English Canadian, are not going to appreciate very much. But if it is true that 85% of our natural resource is controlled by the exterior, then would you believe that states should implicate more and Petrocan should have more power? Or in any way, should province has more power upon natural resource?
They have now they have great powers now on natural resources. As to Petrocan, the main advantage of Petrocan It is that it is a state agency. And as a state agency, it could negotiate with other countries, not only to buy or to sell oil, but also they could give guarantees in other fields. They could say, if you sell oil to Canada, we will open a market for computers. They have access to all the other state agencies. That's why in the U.S., I think Governor Brown and I believe Senator Kennedy came with a proposal to have a U.S. state agency to import oil in order to increase the powers of the agent. So I would be favored for the state of Canada to have, for the Canadian government to have to keep Petrocan. I think this could be a good tool to face the situation.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Bourassa, I'd like to hear your comments on the recent return of the Cossette-Trudels and other exiled FLQ members on the return to Quebec. Do you agree with the penalty that they have been given? As well as, do you feel that those FLQ members implicated in the murder of Pierre Laporte should be released or paroled?
Well, the judgment was given in the case of the Cossette-Trudel. I believe it was 2 years. I think I did not read the judgment. I can only tell you that I read the editorials saying, most of the editorials say that it was some, the reaction of the people was it was not enough or too much, but the reasons which were given by the judge, and so far I can remember, seems to justify to respect that judgment. As to the October crisis you know my stand about that. During the fall, I say that I was quite favorable to a public inquiry about the October crisis. Mr. Lévesque said many years ago that they were, or even recently, that they were unacceptable things about the October crisis. So if they were unacceptable things in his view, he should either call a public inquiry, he's in power now, or say exactly what was unacceptable, or withdraw what he said. I believe the crisis, you might remember, was it was one of the most difficult crises in the history of Canada, and if we want to sum up the crisis, we could say that it was related to 3 different things. Whether the government should give up to the terrorists, whether we were right to call the army, and thirdly, the application of the War Measure Act. So these were 3 different things, and I would say that my government and the government of Mr. Trudeau were right not to give up to the terrorists, despite recommendation by a great part of the intelligentsia in Quebec saying to us we should give up to the terrorists. And history gave us reason about that. And Germany in 1974, they gave up to the terrorists following the kidnapping of a German member of parliament. They did liberate 6 criminals. And those 6 criminals came back and killed 5 persons, Schleyer and his 4 bodyguards, the following year. And at that time, the German government said, we don't give up. So that important fundamental principle of not giving up following kidnapping by terrorists, I think we got the support of most of the people at that time. Not the intelligentsia, almost as old, was against, but this, I believe, was, historically speaking, I think our action was justified. Calling the army, now everybody would say that they agree with that action. At that time there were doubts, but now it seems that the police forces were exhausted and that therefore the government had to do something, and the army came as a support of the police forces. As to the third question, whether we were justified to apply the War Measure Act, this was the only action which was available to the government at that time. I remember that quite well. Mr. Laporte was kidnapped on Saturday. We tried to negotiate on Monday, not to negotiate on fundamental principle. As leader of government, I did appoint Robert Demers to negotiate with the representative of the FLQ, and they were discussing without any serious result. So day after day, you had a British diplomat who was kidnapped, a minister of the government who was kidnapped, and we were unsuccessful to catch the kidnapper. So what was the responsibility of the government on Thursday or Friday or Saturday? What was the responsibility of the government? To do nothing and risk a third kidnapping, or to use the only available tool or action which was existing at that time, the partial application of the War Measure Act. So on Thursday afternoon, I communicate with Mr. Trudeau and say, if at 3 o'clock in the morning, following the press release, I issue a press release to the FLQ, as saying to the FLQ, those are the conditions of the Quebec government. If you accept those conditions, safe conduct to Cuba and things like that, then you could liberate Pierre Laporte. You could have the safe conduct. This, we got no answer, and then we got the application of the War Measure Act. So these are the three questions. When you are asking me also what should be the treatment of Rose and all that, I think this is no more my responsibility. I think I should leave that to the judgment of the present governments in Ottawa or Quebec. But I'm saying that when we are considering the October crisis, and if I'm calling for a public inquiry, it's because I feel this is such an important event in our history that we should have the light on that. Traveling in Quebec now, I am finding a lot of skeptical reaction following the October crisis. And I think it's the responsibility of the Quebec government to respect its strong electoral commitment to make the light on that.
There was a CBC documentary done at an anniversary a few years later. I saw this in Sejep a couple of years ago. And one point that was raised was that the police did in fact know who was involved. The day after, they did have sketches out, and that they were trailing Paul Rose at one time, but he slipped out for some other reason. And their conclusion was that the War Measures Act was not a necessity at the time. It was a way of cleaning up some loose political ends and sort of destroying any possible, opposition to the established political society of the time in Quebec.
Yeah, we could say that after. It's always easy to say that the War Measure Act was not. But when we did pass it, we had the support of 90% of the population. But our responsibility as leader of the government at that time was whether we were doing nothing, facing an extremely difficult situation, a minister kidnapped, a diplomat kidnapped, whether we were doing nothing as a government, even if we could do something, or we were using the powers we had. So now, post facto, with all the information, a lot of people could say it was a disproportional reaction. But at the time we took the decision, I believe that as responsible statement, we were totally justified to take no risk with the situation existing at that time in Quebec, because we had enough events before to justify us to take no risk at that time.
Thank you.
Mr. Bourassa, depending on what exactly you'd anticipate economically for the 80s, what can you see happening, something close to us all, regarding Anglophone universities in Quebec? With each budget cut, it seems we're getting squeezed out more and more. What's going to happen there?
You mean in the education sector?
Yes, universities, English universities.
Oh, I would be surprised that they would be. I don't know the details of the budget, but I would be surprised that they are discrimination against the English-speaking sector in the universities. I don't know. I know that Mr. Parizeau is looking for austerity now as much as he can. All finance ministers are trying to reduce the expenditure, but I'm not aware enough of the details of the budget to tell you, to comment on that, whether the government will reduce the credits for the public sector. So it's difficult for me to comment.
Il semblerait que depuis 3 ans, depuis que le Parti québécois est rentré au pouvoir, il y a beaucoup plus de grèves qu'il y en avait, bien qu'il y en avait très peu au début. De ce fait-là, on se demande, je me demande, OK, on dit d'un côté que c'est pas la faute du Parti québécois, c'est les mouvements sociaux dans une société. De là, je me demande la question suivante, c'est que, supposons que le Parti québécois partirait, le Parti libéral, lui, pourrait-il faire mieux ou comment pourrait-il entrevoir la question?
Les problèmes de relations de travail sont les plus difficiles pour une société ou un gouvernement actuel. Parce qu'à chaque période de relations de travail, le gouvernement en sort affaibli. Vous n'avez pas d'objection que je réponde en anglais, peut-être pour rejoindre l'ensemble?
Pas de problème.
No. I had a very difficult, two difficult experience with labor relations in 72 and 76. And 72, I took the tough line because the three top union leaders went to jail, as you might remember. I don't think there are not many examples in the free world where the three top union leaders have to go to jail. But this got a lot of support from the population. But what the government can do, and 75, 76, I had to face a similar situation, but then I had the Olympic Games, which were threatened very seriously for many months. I was told very often I should cancel the game. I refused to do that because it was not an happy decision to tell to the people, and I asked my collaborators to work to the maximum in order to save the game, and they were successful finally. But at that time it was more difficult to negotiate with the unions. I have one hand behind my back because I could have consequences on the Olympic side. But obviously you're right in saying that this is one of the most difficult questions for all government. Look what's happening in England. Edward Heath 5 years ago was defeated because he was too tough with the unions. A lot of people say, we will elect the Labour people, the Labour government. They have close relation with the union leaders. It will be easier to have social peace. Then they have Mr. Callaghan. Mr. Callaghan was defeated because he was too smooth or too soft with the unions. The people could not accept strike in the hospitals. So they vote against Mr. Callaghan. It's almost the same here. They partly vote against me because of all those strikes and the hospitals, with the schools. Hydro-Quebec, I have a strike of Hydro-Quebec right in the middle of my electoral campaign. It was not the best time. And they vote against the government at that time, but partly because of that. And now the Parti Québécois is facing the same thing. Even now, the prison strike is extremely difficult strike for him, because it's well known that the leaders of the CEQ, Centrale d'Éducation du Québec, are strong PQ militants, that the most important PQ militants are among the teachers' union leaders. And they don't care about the referendum in 3 months. They don't care about the damage to the Parti Québécois as a good government facing strike after strike. They did miss one. They have one in Hydro-Quebec, one in public transport, one in the hospitals, civil service. They have all the strikes they could have. So you have those union militants and the Parti Québécois supporters. They don't care about politics, about the damage they are making to the Parti Québécois for the referendum 3 months or 4 months before the most important time for the life or the future of the party. They are making a strike to have better conditions we are working with. This is showing what? We are living in a world where the society is not ready, and we consider the society as different groups. We are living in a world where different groups are not ready to make sacrifices for political reasons or other reasons.